Australia is known as a multicultural city and also as a multilingual city. Although the official language is English, there are about 180 community languages used by immigrants in Australia. So let's ask the opinion of a local Australian.
I think now we are so used to the constant arrival of new immigrant groups that we simply accept the inability to speak English and the gradual learning of English, so that anybody who's lived in Sydney from the Second World War on is used to talking to people who have limited ability in English. And now we're so used to it, it doesn't matter whether that person is Italian, Japanese, Russian, Ethiopian, South American. It doesn't make any difference anymore. You know, we've all learnt to speak a simplified English. Yeah? So it's certainly true that if I'm talking to educated middle class Caucasian Australians, then I'm going to use a different language to talking to an Ethiopian taxi driver who's only been here for 12 months. Yeah?
So how often are these community languages used in daily life, and are there any connections across the generations? Indian immigrants have a high rate of English usage in their daily life. About 75% of people use only English at home, while only 25% of people use their native language at home. Also, people who intermarry tend to use only English in their daily life. And what language do you often speak at home now?
English?
English only.
Yes, English only. Yeah.
Okay. And what language do your parents and family speak to you?
Punjabi.
Punjabi.
Yeah.
Thank you. And do you have children?
Yes, one boy.
So, what language do you use with them?
English?
English.
English only.
English only.
And what language do your parents and family speak to you?
Punjabi.
Hindi.
Hindi only or?
Hindi only. Hindi. Hindi.
Indians born in Australia also have a high rate of English usage. About 60% of them use only English at home. However, 20% answered that they use mostly English at home, and 20% speak English and their native languages to the same degree. Although they maintain their native languages to some extent, the rate of language maintenance is low. And what language do you often speak at home now?
English only.
What language do your parents and family speak to you?
English only.
What language do you often speak at home now?
English.
Italian immigrants have a high rate of community language usage. According to the interview, 33% of people use only their native language at home, while 67% of people use mostly their native language at home.
I'm an industrial designer, but I'm working in hospitality at the moment. At work I use, 50% Italian and 50% English. But as you see, the staff is all Italian, so Italian is probably gets to 70%, I guess. At home I live with Italians, so Italian.
Okay, so only Italian?
Only Italian, yeah.
My language, I use a lot of Italian because we are a lot of Italian people inside the restaurant.
Yeah.
But I try to speak English sometimes.
Where was your birthplace?
It's in Sicily, Palermo.
Sicily, okay.
Yeah. Here in Australia, I speak Italian because I live with Italian flatmates.
Oh.
But like I got a lot of English people, so like I used to speak English sometimes in the house too. So
So it's like mostly Italian.
yeah, it's mostly Italian, yeah, for sure.
55% of Australian-born Italians use only English at home. About 36% use mostly English and 9% use English and their native language to the same degree. They have high language maintenance across the generations.
I grew up in an Australia where everybody was Australian. And then all these Italians and Greeks and Mediterranean types, refos arrived. Well, they've had a huge impact.
The Italian community, which has a long-standing and strongly developed community in Sydney, has a high rate of community language usage and maintenance across the generations, more so than the Indian communities. Some Indian immigrants try to maintain their language to some extent, but it is not as strong as Italian language maintenance. Is there any connection between language and cultural identity? What do you consider to be your cultural identity?
Cultural identity. Indian,
Why do you think your cultural identity is Indian?
because I was born there. My parents have been there for several thousand years.
Plus the Indians are now arriving. Well, you know, we look around and see what we think is lots of Indians, but if you think there's 1 billion of the bastards, well, we ain't seen nothing yet, you know.
Of course, my children will not say that because they were born here. They have perhaps Australian more.
Do you think they would say they are Australian or Australian Indian?
Australian Indian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you consider to be your cultural identity?
Australian?
Australian.
No, Australian Indian, yeah.
Australian.
Or Indian Australian? What? Australian Indian, yeah.
Australian.
Or Indian Australian? What?
Indian?
Why do you think your cultural identity is Indian?
Because I'm 100% Indian.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like born, bred, you know. Traditions, as far as traditions are concerned, I still am very Indian. My thinking is still very Indian, even though I have lived here for 27 years.
In general, most Indians born in Australia identify themselves as Indian Australian. The main reason given was that they have an Indian identity from their parental background and Australian identity from where they grew up. What do you consider to be your cultural identity?
Australian.
Could you tell me the reason, please?
Well, because I was born and I grew up here.
I guess I find that I'm a mix of both worlds. In some ways, like in sport, I always am Australian. But in other ways, I'll find that I'm very much part of the, say, Indian spiritualism, that I feel that all of that stuff, you know, I'm more in touch with than Christianity or any of the westernized religions.
Even though their rate of language maintenance is low, they have a strong cultural identity from their family background. People who gave their cultural identity as Indian Australian actually learned their native languages to some extent, while people who say their cultural identity is Australian tend not to learn their native language at all. All of the Italian immigrants interviewed defined their cultural identity as Italian. The reasons given were that Italy is the place where they grew up, and they know more about Italy than about Australia.
My cultural identity, like I consider, is the Sicilian one.
Sicilian,
Yeah, for sure.
okay.
Yeah, I'm proud to be Sicilian.
And do you feel that your cultural and linguistic identity has a large impact in defining you and your lifestyle in Australia?
I think here is plenty of Sicilian people. So sometimes when I hear someone speaking Sicilian with me, like I enjoy it, like because like a long time ago, like a lot of immigrants from Sicily they came here, so they start to build the Australia. So sometimes I feel at home, so that is good because like I feel someone from my identity originally living here with me. Okay.
The cultural identity, Italian homemade, 100%.
Do you feel that your cultural and linguistic identity has large impact in defining you and your lifestyle in Australia?
Yes, I believe it does. But I like to blend in.
40% of people born in Australia from Italian parents answered that their cultural identity is Italian-Australian. 40% answered Italian and 20% answered other due to a further mix of background cultures. The reasons behind answering Italian-Australian were because they speak both English and Italian and their family background. The answer of Italian was due to their parental background and long-standing Italian ancestry. Okay, what do you consider to be your cultural identity?
Human. I say I'm Australian, and then yeah, because I think that can mean a lot of things these days.
The reasons given were because of eating habits and family background.
As each wave of immigrants has arrived, one of the first things they do is set up their own eating houses, and then we discover them and go, that's good.
Italian Australians have a strong cultural identity as well as maintaining their native language across the generations. All people who learn or speak Italian state their cultural identity as Italian or Italian-Australian, while people who do not speak Italian state their cultural identity as Australian. The Italian community, as the older cultural community in Sydney, tend to use and maintain their community language more than Indians. However, Indian communities do use and maintain their language to some extent, especially for basic phrases and conversation. Both communities have a strong cultural identity. Also, language and cultural identity are highly connected in both communities, because people who learn or speak the community languages mainly gave their cultural identity as a mixture. People who only speak English usually gave their cultural identity as Australian. Another discovery was that in general, males tend to maintain their community language and identity much more than females. This seems to relate to a higher level of males stating their cultural identity to be that of their parents or grandparents. A prediction for the future based on those interviewed would be that in the future we can expect a high level of language maintenance. 84% of subjects born in Australia from foreign parents or grandparents stated that they will maintain their community language when they have children in Australia.
Our whole Australian idiom will change. It'll be less correct English and more a bastard mixture, which is not necessarily a bad thing.